Whether your beer is in a bottle, can, or glass, kick back and relax. It's Better on Draft.
We are live. This is episode 260, Better on Draft podcast. My name is Ken. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it on this glorious Friday night. As I said, my name is Ken. This is Better on Draft. Let's bring in the other two hosts. Wendy, how are you, and what are you drinking today?
I am fantastic. I'm so glad that it is Friday. I am drinking a Mellow Meridian. I haven't even gotten a chance to taste it yet.
Well, I know we'll be talking about what the beer's flavor profile is, because Mellow Meridian is from what brewery?
This is horrible. Groundbreaker.
Groundbreaker.
I knew that.
I was like, is it
my phone?
Great Breaker? You know, I definitely fumbled it a few times typing it. But Robert, what's up? What are you drinking? You're muted. Congratulations. Welcome to the 21st century.
Yes. Yes. And I saw it too, and I knew it right when Wendy was talking. I was like, all right, I need to unmute myself. And then I didn't. All right. So I am drinking the Inclusion Dry Hopped Pale Ale from Groundbreaker. I also cracked open the new Mexican lager from Eastern Market Brewing Company, freshly canned, don't even have labels yet.
Well, for me, I've got an Olallie from Groundbreaker. This is a dedicated gluten-free brewery. That is today's guest. I'm going to introduce them real quick. Why don't you tell us what you do, Brian? Who are you? What you do for Groundbreaker?
Hey, I'm Brian Newcomb. I am the Michigan brand ambassador for Groundbreaker. They're out of Oregon, and they're being distributed now in Michigan through Imperial Beverage. It's definitely a big deal for Coeliacs and anyone else that's gluten sensitive, gluten intolerant, living the gluten-free lifestyle. To actually get a certified gluten-free, dedicated gluten-free brewery's product into our state.
All right, and on the other side of me, on the video, we have Tyler. Tyler, what do you do over at Groundbreaker?
Hi, I'm Tyler Kueber, and I'm the head brewer at Groundbreaker Brewing Company.
Awesome. And before we get into the interview, Nicholas, as always, I'm sure Brody was a mess today, but what are you drinking to celebrate him going to sleep?
Well, it wasn't just today. Last night was kind of rough. He was literally rolling around in his crib, 360 degrees. So his head was staying right in the middle of the crib. And that's what he did pretty much most of the night. But anywho, to celebrate him going to bed, just now putting him to bed, I am drinking the Mellow Meridian from Groundbreaker. I just cracked that open. And since I'm catching up from last week, the Hellas from Two Roots.
Two Roots, episode 259 of the Better on Draft podcast. You can go check it out over at youtube.com/Better on Draft or facebook.com/Better on Draft for the video or the audio, iTunes, Spotify. Don't forget to rate us. We appreciate it. Now, as we go in, the very first question I want to ask, because we had an amazing discussion, maybe 4.5 years ago, with Matt over at Brewery Becker. Brewery Becker talks that they deglutenize all of their beer, meaning that they add an enzyme on there to remove the gluten. So at a macro level, let's real quick break. What's the difference between gluten-free, gluten-reduced, or deglutenized? How do you determine those three legally, FDA, governmentally, however you want to define it?
So I have to put my personal opinion aside for 1 second on this, because I have a strong opinion about gluten-reduced fucking bullshit. So the gluten, reduced, removed, deglutenized, they brew the beer with barley, wheat, rye, so all gluten grains. After fermentation, they add in an enzyme called, the generic term is brewer's Coeliacs, which breaks down the gluten protein into small pieces. And what this is supposed to accomplish, is that, like say my body as a celiac won't recognize it and react to it. Problem is, I still get sick. There's still gluten in there. From a very ethical / getting into legal standpoint, you cannot, the testing kits that are used, most of the tests done for gluten cannot be used on hydrolyzed or fermented products. And beer is both. When you it goes through the mash with the enzymes, that's basically hydrolyzing the proteins, and then you're fermenting it. So those tests are inaccurate. You could test a beer at 20 parts per million, and it's actually, you throw it into a mass spectrometer, it might be 50. There was a study done by the Gluten Intolerance group, and her name, Dr. Laura Allred, did this study. It found that gluten-reduced beers are not safe for celiacs. The Gluten Intolerance group they're the ones that certify products to be gluten-free through scientific method. And if anyone wants to really get an in-depth explanation of that study, the Brew Lab did an episode just a couple of weeks ago that came out. It's Brew Lab episode 14, The Celiac Response to Gluten in Beer with Dr. Laura Allred. So that's kind of the scientific aspect of that. Gluten-free beer is made from sorghum, rice, millet, quinoa, buckwheat are the major grains used, all naturally gluten-free. So a gluten-free beer is a beer that's made without using any gluten ingredients. That goes all the way down to the yeast, because a lot of brewing yeast is grown on liquid medium, and that is usually barley based. So if you're, like when Tyler's making the gluten-free beer, they also source either, like a dry yeast or a yeast that is specially grown in probably sorghum syrup or sorghum based wort.
Typically, yeah, that's true. And to expand on that a little bit further, all of our ingredients, since we're certified gluten-free brewery, we're GFCO certified, we need to get approval for all of our ingredients from the GFCO. Yeah, there's their logo right there. So it's actually, they're really strict. So we can source an ingredient that is inherently gluten-free, that isn't certified, doesn't pass the standards of the GFCO. For example, we use, if we were to try and bring in rice to brew, and we found out that the rice field is butted up against a wheat field, we can no longer use that rice. Even though the rice itself is inherently gluten-free, it doesn't pass through the rigorous standards that our certification company has set. So we really take a step beyond as far as ensuring that our product is 100% gluten-free. And fun story about your testing comments about how sometimes the testing equipment can fail and not operate properly based on what part of the process you're doing. We actually shut down our brewery early on. I want to say it was 2013, because we were spitting out false positive gluten tests, because we test every single batch of beer. Right. And it turns out that the type of testing equipment that we used in-house, which is real straightforward, it's the ELISA gluten test. It was getting thrown off by our sorghum that we were using in our beer. So we had to send it off to a professional lab. Honestly, I think it was in Michigan. And they came back and were like, no, dude, you're 100%, there's no gluten in here, I promise you. And we're like, well, what's going on with our testing equipment? We had to completely change our SOP for when we test our products. to see if they're gluten negative or not. So fun story about that. Make sure you do your homework about when you should be testing if you're looking to get into gluten-free brewing.
Well, it's obvious why Brian is into gluten-free beer. He wears it right on his sleeve and out of his mouth, that's for sure. Tyler, how did you get into brewing gluten-free beer?
100% by chance.
Okay.
I was a pretty avid home brewer all throughout college. I spent more time brewing beer than I did going to class. I skipped classes most of the time. I was brewing 5 days a week. I dedicated an entire bedroom of the house that I was renting to beer production. I think my record, whether in production or in a keg or on tap, I had 120 gallons in that bedroom that I brewed 5 gallons at a time.
Damn.
So I was sponsoring political science, like people running for political campaigns. I was, providing beer for a bunch of events there for fundraising campaigns, this, that, and the other. Needless to say, I met a lot of people in college. Flash forward a couple of years, and I'm moving into apartment with who was now my wife. It's our first place living together. We go out to a local bar, and I ran into a couple of people that I met in college through home brewing, and they worked at Groundbreaker Brewing Company. And they were like, "Hey, man, you were the beer guy in college. Do you have any interest in going pro?" We don't have anything for you aside from sweeping the floors right now, but if you want to get a foot in the door, you can get a foot in the door. So I took them up on their offer. I got my foot in the door, and a couple of years later, I showed my worth, and I was head brewer. So gluten-free just was 100% by chance. I just happened to be in the neighborhood, and I was like, hey, brewing is brewing, man. And it's still a lot of fun. Doesn't matter if it's with barley or not. It's all pretty much the same, with some just interesting challenges and hurdles to jump through doing it gluten-free.
Oh, Ken, we cannot hear you at all.
The next question I wanted to ask before we I pass it off to one of my co-hosts. You've mentioned a lot of the different types of ingredients that you guys use. You mentioned sorghum, rice, and other types of ingredients to help with brewing gluten-free beer. Is there like an industry standard for gluten-free ingredients to brew a beer, or do you guys do something different? Like what else can people use to brew gluten-free beer?
You can make gluten-free beer at about just about anything. When we started out, we relied really heavily on chestnuts, and we still do use chestnuts, and we also lean pretty heavily on lentils. We were the first dedicated gluten-free brewery in the United States, so there really wasn't much in the way of ingredients to play around with. So we actually had to buy a roaster and bring a roaster out into the dock and roast our own raw ingredients. Now there's all sorts of options out there for you that are designed specifically for brewing. There's big companies like Grouse that specializes in millet, but also offers corn and quinoa and buckwheat products. We lean pretty heavily on Eckert malting and roasting out of Chico, California. Sorry about that. And they specialize in rice, and they're both these companies specialize in malting products and roasting them to kind of simulate what you would get out of a roasted barley for traditional brewing. And Brian, I think you know of a lot of other cool little products that you got your hands on down there. You want to talk a bit about what you have there?
Yeah, I've got. I'm friends with Bard's. Bard's beer. No one there is actually named Bard. Anyway. They use malted sorghum to make their beers. And so I've been able to source that from them. And I'm just a couple months into working with it and figuring it out. I'm working on an article to kind of describe the difference between working with sorghum malt versus sorghum syrup, because there's similarities and there's some definite differences. A mutual friend of ours, JP. Yeah. There's like, yeah,
oh, yeah.
JP. Oh, yeah. Yep, JP Beerley. He did some batches. So he did like side by side where this beer he usually makes with, sorghum syrup and, X amount of rice and millet and whatever to make a porter. And then he did the same recipe and just replaced the sorghum syrup with the same points value worth of sorghum malt. And is like, yeah, they were two different beers. I mean, they were still both a porter, but the one with the sorghum malt finished 0.005 drier than the sorghum syrup beer and had a definite flavor difference.
I believe that, yeah.
And it's difficult to describe, and I haven't done a side by side. I mean, JP would be the best person to say, okay, here's a description of the difference between the two. Let's see, I've also been working with malted oats that I'm sourcing from Haas Malts, which is fairly near me. It's, only 4 hours away, or is it 2.5? No, they're in like somewhere in Ohio. I think it's Cincinnati. I always get like my Ohio cities confused. And now, like with them, so Groundbreaker doesn't use oats because a lot of celiacs are sensitive to oats. I'm not, so I can use it in my home brewing, but I still have to be very careful how I source it because oats are renowned for being cross-contaminated. I wouldn't eat oats until maybe 2-3 years ago, because I grew up I've been gluten-free since I was 12, and at that time it was don't eat oats because they're contaminated. And it took me a long time to work up that courage of, okay, they're certified gluten-free. Everyone on the Facebook pages for celiac says, like most of the people say that they don't get sick. Okay, well, I've got the next 3 days off. I'm going to try it and pray. And I was fine. But they source from a dedicated farm. They do like very strenuous cleaning of all the equipment that the oats touch and, all of this. Eliza tested the product myself at home. It's used by Sibling Revelry, which is in, I think, Cincinnati. They do a single gluten-free beer. They test every batch, they test the product coming in, multiple steps along the way. They do a lot of, safety testing. They're not dedicated gluten-free, and they're not certified, which, that's like a big deal for a lot of celiacs. I'm trying to think what else I've got that's unique and different. I'm starting to roast the sorghum to try to make like a Vienna or a chocolate malt.
Nice.
Yeah. Let's get into some of the beers that we've got here.
Okay.
So as I said in the beginning, that I was drinking the Inclusion, the dry hopped pale ale, and just kind of sipping it and drinking it. Obviously, for someone who does not have celiac, but sometimes let's just say sometimes I do have some grain issues. We'll just put it that way. I can't have my peanut butter and jelly sandwiches anymore. But in drinking it, it has the mouthfeel of beer. I mean, as pouring it, it has kind of the head of beer. The finish is a little different, which using different ingredients and, slightly different process that I would imagine that it's going to be that way, that should, just kind of click right there. So, I mean, it is a pale ale. I mean, it is a pretty good pale ale. But I was wondering, Tyler, if you could just kind of talk about Inclusion and I guess the process and everything in making this pale ale.
Sure. I mean, the process is pretty similar if you're familiar with the brewing process in general. I mean, I'm guessing you guys are all home brewers. So we would use what we do in our system is basically partial mash. We do a mixture of syrup and a mixture of mashed ingredients. From the brewing process, that is 100% all it is. The only difference is that there's no amylase inherent. Excuse me, inherent in our ingredients. So we need to add artificial enzymes in order to convert all of those starches into sugars. And there's a variety of enzymes at the brewer's disposal to use from. We're constantly experimenting with what enzymes we use. It's a massive headache. But, other than that, it's playing around with time. It's playing around with temperature. It's playing around with what enzymes you're using. And other than that, it's just brewing as normal, honestly. The biggest challenge, like you said, is that final kind of like aftertaste, that kind of flavor you get. Mm-hmm. And for us, that's mostly coming from sorghum. If you try different gluten-free beers, you're going to get different kind of aftertastes. It's pretty easy to get that first flavor easy. I use that lightly. It's easy for me now to get that first flavor coming at you and being like, yeah, that tastes like a porter. And then you get that swallow down and you're like, wait, something's going on the finish, right. And that's the biggest challenge that I've found is getting the finish, getting the entire flavor profile from beginning to end to really come across the way you want it to. And for us, our biggest challenge is overcoming sorghum. In my opinion, with a lot of other gluten-free breweries and beers in general, millet also causes a huge challenge overcoming those flavors. Right. But it can be done. It's just a matter of finding the right ratio, what percentage of your grist is what type of ingredient, and what kind of IBUs you're throwing in there, because you might find that your perceived bitterness is different and your hop utilization is a little bit different based on your ingredients. So you can't reference a brewing book, a traditional brewing book directly and make a recipe off of that, but you can kind of use the concepts to steer you in kind of the right direction. But honestly, it's a lot of trial and error.
Yeah. And I mean, for something that it on the can, it has it as 5.7%. I mean, anything else that I've normally had that's around that 5 to 7 range, like I can tell that there's some form of alcohol in it. And this is just very smooth and just light. And it's like it's like if you look for it and look for the alcohol, you might find it. So it's very nicely hidden in there. But I'm going to pass it to Wendy here.
I have a couple of questions. First, I'm drinking the Mellow Meridian, which is the juicy pale ale, which I'm really excited to share. I have a couple of friends who are gluten-free, and they're always looking for gluten-free beers. And they have found that a lot of times they can't have like the hazy IPAs or the juicy IPAs because a lot of times they use wheat in them. So they're really excited. I'm really excited to share that one. It's got a really good citrus flavor. It's still got a little bit of the bitterness to it. So I think it's got everything that they're looking for in that style. My question though is, what style have you found was the most difficult to get that flavor profile in?
Oh gosh. I had a challenging time making, we pulled it off, but a traditional stout was really hard, like darker beer. Any beer that relies most heavily on the flavor of the grain is obviously the most difficult to pull off. So stouts were tough. Porters were tough. We have been playing around with and aren't quite happy with styles like Helles and Pilsner, because that's just naked Pilsner. That's just naked Pilsner malt. Like, how do you do that gluten-free? We're working on it, but that's really challenging to try and pull off. And it goes into a lot of things beyond just what ingredients you're using, but also like what sort of water chemistry are you doing? If you look at your water chemistry and what those different salts do to your beer, a lot of them affect how the malt is perceived. So we're playing around a lot with how we're using different types of calciums to try and bring out different malt flavors and try to maybe reduce some of those off flavors that we get from some of our other ingredients that we use. But really, any style that relies solely on malts and not yeast and not hops, they're difficult to reproduce.
So basically what you're telling me is that you're like a mad scientist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you've done a really good job
every
because I
gluten-free
really like
brewer
this
is a
beer.
mad scientist. Yes.
Rob, you had something else you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I was curious about. I was on the website earlier this week, and I was noticing something that was on there about specifically with the Gastropub, and that not only are the beers gluten free, but all of the food is gluten free. And from what I was reading, it was even to the point where employees were not allowed to bring gluten into the facilities. So I'm curious about that because it's like, I get where everything is going gluten free. Is it just, I don't even know how to word this. It's just like, is that just, screw it. This is the lifestyle. We're running gluten free, get on train or, take off or what? I mean, I guess tell us about that and just how everything is gluten free, period.
Well, I mean, I didn't found the brewery. And I got started there 2 years after they opened. But here's the story: is the owner and the founder was really into beer and got some friends or had some friends that found out that we're celiac. This is like 2010, and he was like, "What the hell is celiac?" Like, no one knew what that was, And he couldn't take his friends to go to a brew pub, and have a good time. So he was like, fuck it, I will make gluten-free beer. And he made really crappy gluten-free beer for a while until he figured out something that worked. But his entire goal with founding the company, this is James Newmeister I'm referring to, his entire goal with founding the company was to provide a 100% safe gluten-free community for people that needed to have a gluten-free a safe gluten-free space to consume beer and to have the brew pub scene. He later found out that his wife is celiac, and a lot of her health issues were solved once she dropped gluten out of her diet. But that was the number one goal: is 100% safe place for celiacs to come and eat and drink. And part of that had to meant not only safe for them to eat, but also like a mental headspace that's safe for them. Because I don't know if you got the impression from Brian when he was talking about oats earlier, but it's scary out there.
It is.
Being celiac or having any food allergy that most people don't really know about. So, it was pretty easy conclusion to come to just be like, you know what, we're just not letting any gluten in at all, not in our space.
Right.
And that was just kind of for the mental well-being for anyone who wanted to come and enjoy what we had to offer. It's posted on the door, don't bring gluten in. I've had to kick people out for bringing donuts in on a sales call, it's for the best well-being of our customers, is to make sure that they know that we're taking this pretty seriously and it's okay to come.
Yeah, and that is pretty cool. And I guess for those of us that are here in Michigan, I guess maybe if they're paying attention to the Michigan Beer Map app that a certain someone over here has developed.
The Michigan Brewery Map app.
Michigan Brewery Map app, thank you. MBMA. Let's just go MBMA.
Yeah.
It's something like that.
mibeer.com, free app for you to download iOS and Android. You can find every single brewery, including open and upcoming. And you can search. Sadly, we don't have a gluten-free option yet on the app, but maybe that's something we look into here soon.
I like it that you said yet.
Yes, but it is apparently on the way.
You're talking to the guy who makes all the decisions about the app. Therefore, I can make all the decisions.
Here we go.
But for those who may be celiac and are looking for something that may now, I know spirits are celiac friendly, correct?
Yes.
Regular distilled spirits, nothing fancy with anything, no additives.
Right. As long as there's no additives, there's a little bit of trial and error because, like, I react to Jack Daniels. I don't know why.
It's the barrels.
Supposedly, it's the distillation process completely separates the alcohol from everything else. Somehow I still get sick from it.
It's the barrels, honestly.
Yeah, there's the barrels. There's, the safest is always you start with something with ingredients that do not contain gluten, and your product at the end will not contain gluten. I mean, it's kind of like I liken the whole thing to, like peanuts. Like, I mean, are you going to give a peanut reduced product to someone who's deathly allergic to peanuts? No. And I mean, yeah, gluten's not going to kill me today, but if I'm exposed to, low levels that I don't pick up symptomatically for 20, 30, 40 years, that increases my chances of colon cancer, and that will kill you. And I guess that's one point I want to make is, along with Robert's question and Tyler's answer with, you're dedicating a facility to the point where your employees cannot bring in, a gluten donut. Like, for me as a celiac, when that's your role, I'm like, okay, I know when I walk in here, everything is, I mean, it's 1,000% safe. Like, there's no chance that someone decided to eat their sandwich and go check on the fermenter and a couple of crumbs went in there. And those 2 crumbs somehow made it into my glass, and I go home and shit my brains out. And I mean, that's literally how sensitive I am. If, food, I've had, I got Boston Market this one time, and, I get home, the fucking cornbread's right on top of the chicken. I was like, fuck it. I threw the bread away. I wipe it off. I mean, I think I've got it clean. Oh my God. The next day I was so sick. It really doesn't take much to make a celiac extremely ill. And there's people that are even more sensitive than I am. I know a lot of people with celiac that they dedicate their entire house is gluten-free. Like their whole family goes gluten-free because of one person in the family. So.
Well, maybe I won't put a gluten-free option on my app, because if I'm responsible for someone exploding,
well, you're doing is helping us get to, somewhere that, has options for us. Like, there's this whole range, and when you're celiac, you have to educate yourself and know, and kind of evaluate and investigate. Like, I mean, I can eat at Bob Evans. We went there for dinner today, and my fish came out, and I was like, okay, this doesn't look right. Talk to them. I'm like, no, bring me the steak, because I know that's okay. I've had it before. You learn a lot by experience, but if I could have an app where I could open it up and say, okay, where's the nearest gluten-free, or, where's the nearest restaurant that has gluten-free beer, or, the nearest brewery that has gluten-free beer, then I can go there, or I can call them and talk to them and say, okay, what's your cleaning protocol? What are the ingredients used in your gluten-free beer? Are you using liquid yeast or dry yeast? Is your yeast, from this place or this place that actually makes a liquid yeast that's gluten-free? I can evaluate it from there.
To answer that phone call, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well,
what do you mean yeast? I just seat people down, Brian. Let me get somebody else on the phone for you.
Well, I think the more powerful tool that the community has with an app like that is the community itself. Being able to post on that app screen. If you go to that restaurant and the community's been like, yeah, I'm celiac. Here's, my experience at this particular place.
Yeah.
Because like Brian was saying, you need to educate yourself. So in my experience, most folks that have celiac, they're already in an online community that's communicating with each other about where they can and can't go, what they can and can't have, how each individual is reacting. Because in my experience, and Brian, I'm sure you know way more than I do, it's not cut and dried. It's not like, here's what's going to happen if one person has this. It seems like a highly individualistic,
it's very individualized.
Yeah. There's no way to just be like, I've even heard of some people that are diagnosed celiac that gluten reduced beer, they're fine with. That it seems like a really tricky position to be diagnosed celiac, because you can't rely on what one person's experience is going to mean it's going to be the same for you.
Now, if you're listening to this via podcast, you can listen to us live Fridays at 7 p.m. BetterOnDraft.tv, Facebook and YouTube.com/BetterOnDraft for both. On our YouTube page, somebody said there is a app called the Gluten Dude app. Both of you guys are nodding your head, because I was like, my app can be repurposed for plenty of other things within the industry. So I have no problem if somebody listening were to want to license the app and make it a gluten map app, or gluten-free map app, I should say. Not where's the gluten, but where is not the gluten.
And there's another one out there. It's Find Me Gluten Free, but my suggestion to you with your beer map would be, put on there, just have that on there as a filter option. And then really the liability is going to come down to the establishment to be honest about what they're doing. And, you could even have, gluten-free options, or gluten-friendly versus dedicated gluten-free versus certified gluten-free. Or at least, the difference between gluten options or gluten-free options and dedicated gluten-free, like the one that you were alluding to earlier, Nick's. It's going to open up in Grand Rapids.
Nick's
sometime.
Not to be confused with Nick, who was on the show here, because both of us have questions, because we want to go over 2 more of these beers.
Okay.
I crushed the Olallie. This thing had the right amount of sweetness that was just perfect, easy to drink, but it was a sipper. It wasn't like something that I'm going to crush, like a Leinenkugel, where I drink it and 10 minutes later it's gone, and I'm like, what the hell happened to this beer? Obviously I drank it all, but it took me a good 30 plus minutes while talking just to drink it. Talk to me about the Olallie. What kind of beer is this? The flavors that I got, I definitely got the blackberry, whatever the berry was, but I see it's blackberry. But what were you looking to get out of this beer, Tyler?
Yeah, this beer has a long history. Actually, it's actually what I'm drinking right now as well. But we used to make a blackberry beer with oats.
The flavors that I got,
and that beer is long gone. And we only distributed that beer in exclusive places. This beer is the spiritual successor of that original blackberry beer that we made. But its original intent was to be just your lawnmower beer, and also a fruit beer for people that like beer, which is probably why it's our worst selling beer in our lineup, despite being one of the favorites among all the people that work at Groundbreaker. Because if you look at it and you think, oh, it's a fruit beer, all the people that like fruit beer love framboise, whatever, and they bring it home and they go, well, this isn't a sweet, fruity beer, this is a dry beer. And then you get all the people that, judge fruit beers for being sweet like framboise, and they never buy it in the first place. But what we were going for was a fruit beer for people that enjoy making beer. And so, yeah, it has a whole bunch of blackberries in it and some rose hips. And those are hot side post boil that the rose hips go in. So you still get a little bit of the flavor of the rose hips, but it's mostly in the aroma. And actually a good amount of hops in there as well, just to remind you that, yes, this is beer.
And one thing I want to point out is on the, market in Michigan, at least for, in stores, etc., that's the only fruit beer that's gluten-free. And it's the first fruit beer I've ever had in my life. No, I had a blueberry sour that a friend homebrewed that's gluten-free. So technically the second.
First.
No, it was the first. It was the first. There's a separation there of 6 weeks. I had to think, who gave me the beer first? I I can't recall.
So I cracked open another beer, but I know Nick was drinking it too. So I'm gonna have Nick talk about this next beer because I'm in love with this beer too.
I literally just cracked open this beer like a few minutes ago. That's why I got up from my desk again. Normally I'm good maybe once during the show to get up, and generally during the breaks, never unless my kid's crying, but that's a different topic. So we cracked open the dark ale. I'm getting. I see just looking at it, you had there's Belgian. I'm guessing this is Belgian style because I'm getting like English mild kind of vibe with it a little bit. And
it's more of an English mild.
It is okay because I'll say right now, me, Ken, and Dan, who's not on the show. We love English mild. It is a very. We feel like that style is like almost unappreciated sometimes. Like it gets forgotten about to a degree.
Oh, totally, yeah.
So it's nice to see that, even in a gluten-free style, that you guys have this. Well, so talk a little bit about how this one came to be, and was it always intended to be an English mild?
It was not always intended to be an English mild. This is actually one of the original groundbreaker beers. We've gone through a lot of changes in the history of the brewery. We used to actually dark roast chestnuts and lentils until they were like black. Like our lentils used to look like chocolate chips. Like all of our neighbors would shut their windows in the middle of summertime because there was smoke billowing out of the brewery as we're roasting stuff just to get this dark coloration in this beer. So our original goal was just make a beer that is dark, that tastes good. And we did it. It actually won a couple of medals in its original iteration at GABF. But like I was saying earlier, now we have options with millet, rice, quinoa. We have all these different ingredients that are already roasted. So we no longer are hated by our neighbors. We no longer dark roast our grains. We bring them in. Excuse me. And as this beer was developing, as the ingredients were becoming more available, we just kind of realized that the trajectory we were taking it was kind of towards that mild route. And yeah, there was a time when this was every customer's favorite beer and every employee's least favorite beer, just because the roasting process. I would come home, my wife would force me to disrobe in the driveway, just because I reeked so much, just like smoke. But we're very lucky that those days are over, and we have malting and roasting companies that are certified gluten-free that we're able to use. But yeah, it just kind of naturally, as we're tasting it, as we're changing the recipe, we're tasting it, and most of the staff on the brewery, actually all of the staff in the brewery, none of them are gluten-free anymore. So we're able to go out and do what we call research and development, which is really just go out and start drinking things. And if we have a particular project in mind or a particular beer in mind, we think it might be, a brown porter, we think it might be an English dark mild, we'll just walk down to the bottle shop down the street, grab a couple of bottles of those different styles, taste them side by side, and that's how we're kind of nope, this is definitely walking its way down the path of an English mild. So that's what we really started steering it towards.
Before Nick asks his question, because I know he's got a question for you, I want to make sure that the podcast hears. I want everyone here to remind me, especially Brian. But I want to make sure I email you, Tyler, because I want your address, because I don't want to send a gluten-filled beer to the brewery and break your gluten-free thing. But there is a top-of-the-line English mild made out here by a brewery called Motor City Brewing Works.
Oh yeah.
If you've never had it, if you have, either way, I'm gonna send you it. It's called Ghetto Blaster. If you've seen the movie Guns Akimbo, it's actually in that movie because Daniel Radcliffe is dating someone from Michigan, so Motor City Brewing Works randomly got a nice spot in there with two of their beers.
That's awesome.
But as a produced beer that gets out into a little bit of distro here in Michigan, not many English milds exist, but that is such a great style and a great beer to represent that style. So I'm going to make sure I send that to you, but I know Nick has a question for you.
So refocusing on the grain piece, you mentioned lentils.
Yeah.
Being a grain that is gluten-free, how difficult is it to really roast or to use that and incorporate that in a beer? When I hear lentils, I associate that with being being Lebanese and we'll call it Mediterranean. I'm like four different
Sure.
but when I hear lentils, I hear lentils in soup, lentils in food and all that. Never used in roasting a beer. How easy or how difficult is it to work with lentils in a beer?
Oh, I mean, if you have a roaster, it's easy as pie. And here's if you're really, really curious, here's what you can do is go to your pantry and get a pinch of raw lentils and you taste them. They're going to taste like green beans. Okay. So when you roast them, you can, and you can do this on a very small scale. I've done it on a baking sheet in a hot 400 to 500 degree oven, stirring it every 10 minutes. It gets to a point where they no longer taste like green beans. So, but here's the thing about lentils is you're not roasting them for flavor. One of the big problems with gluten-free beer is head retention. And lentils are rich in protein, and protein causes the head retention. So that is why we started implementing lentils in our recipe. They replaced oats. But we talked about how we used to use oats, but there's a lot of celiacs that would react to oats. We used to use, and actually, oats was the big one that we cut out. And when we got too many complaints about people that loved our beer but had rough weekends after drinking our beers, we knew something had to be done, and that's why we brought in lentils. And this was before a lot of products like quality roasted buckwheat. I guess flaked quinoa was a product, but it was tough to find certified gluten-free. But it was relatively easy to find certified gluten-free lentils, and we needed something to add head retention. This was before my time working at Groundbreaker, but James, the founder, would tell you that his first attempts at making gluten-free beer, you would pour it into a can, and it would behave like Sprite, where all of the head was fizzle away like immediately. So that was another big challenge when starting out, was head retention. That's the big thing with lentils. They're not contributing much for flavor. They can contribute to color if you want your neighbors to hate you. And their PPG is like 1.007. So you're not even getting much fermentables out of it. But, in very small quantities, you can get head retention. And that's why we use the lentils.
Guys.
And when you toast them, it changes. I think it helps with the mouthfeel a little from the lentils. I think I did 2 beers with them toasted, and a lot of times I don't toast just because I'm kind of lazy.
It's a pain in the ass, yeah.
But now I got this little coffee bean roaster that roasts 1 pound at a time. So I guess I don't have that excuse as much anymore, because I can just throw it in there, turn it on at a temperature for an hour, come back, and they'll be right.
Nice.
Tyler and Brian, guys, it is 10 to 7 or 10 to 8. If you're listening live, of course, betterondraft.tv, Facebook and youtube.com/betterondraft. Listen to us live. We're going to be wrapping this up. It has been amazing to talk to you guys. Before we go through our final questions and kind of put you through the ringer of the last questions, my question to you is, since Brian, you are the Michigan brand ambassador, where are we going to see it? Which counties, which stores, who's distributing it, and who should ask their beer store to carry you?
Okay. Everyone ask your beer store to carry us. We're available through Imperial Beverage, and they have like statewide distribution. So at that aspect, basically you can get it anywhere. The biggest thing is customers walking into their favorite beer store and saying, I want this beer, order it, I will fucking buy it. I know. I just heard from my friends over at Beer Baron today. They've got it in stock. They got all 5 styles. They would be, from what I've seen right now on the Metro Detroit area, they have the best. Like they've got all 5 styles. I know Holiday Market in Royal Oak on Main Street has, I think, 2. Downriver, there's Discount Drinks. I think picked up one of them. Not something Bev. Not Bevmo.
No, not this.
I can't remember the name of it. But there's a bunch of their stores that has all of them. And I mean, Grand Rapids, Lansing, Clarkston, beer, what is it? Culture Beer and Cheese picked up one. So I mean, the list keeps growing every day. I'm doing a couple of events, and these are kind of notable. I'm doing an event probably right around June 30th at Sedona Tap House in Novi. They're putting together a special groundbreaker beer and food suggested pairing menu. That'll be good all day. I will be on site probably like 6 to 8 or 6 to 10 or something. So watch my Facebook page, Gluten Free Beer Brian on Facebook, and same thing on Instagram for more details on that. We are doing something with Ferndale Pride, which takes place in October, if I remember the date correctly. That's what we've got on the books right now. And my email is brian@groundbreakerbrewing.com. So if someone that's listening is a store owner or a restaurant that wants to try the beer, shoot me an email. If you're a consumer that wants to make a suggestion of somewhere I should get in contact with, especially if you know the owner and you can get me in touch with them, shoot me an email. I'll work on getting in touch with them and taking them some samples, convincing them that this is great fucking beer, just buy it.
Well, the only suggestion that I have is obviously a gluten-free alt beer. But I want to, we're going to be closing up, asking the final questions. Guys, ask your beer stores, ask your bars to carry it. If you're going to, say, Zatuna Liquor over in Rochester Hills, just south of M59 on Rochester Road, go ask Jack. If you're going to say, our friends over at 3 Nick Scoreboard over in Allen Park, go say, hey, I want gluten-free beer here, and they will listen because they have an amazing craft beer selection there. They are not a sponsor, but I still love them over there. They helped build this podcast, and I appreciate them. As we get through to our final questions, I am going to start with Rob. And Rob, what do you got?
All right. I think I already know the answer to this because it was already alluded to, but I guess pretty simple. Based on, like I said, what Brian said with Jack Daniels, is barrel aging possible with gluten-free beer?
That depends on your definition of barrel aging. I mean, staving is definitely a thing you can do. And believe it or not, you can get gluten-free barrels. They just cost an arm and a leg because you need to commission them from a legitimate cooper and custom coop your barrels. And there's actually a distillery here in Portland where that's what they do. It's a certified gluten-free distillery, and they have professionally coopered barrels that seal without the wheat paste. And 100% of the process is gluten-free from the get-go. So yes, it is possible. It's just expensive and a pain in the ass.
All right. Well, I guess I expect to see this barrel age.
I would love it. You could easily make it $35 and someone will buy it just because it says barrel aged on there.
I mean,
Wendy, what question do you have for you?
A little birdie told me that one of you is as big a fan of shower beers as I am. So my question would be, what style of Groundbreaker beer would be your go-to shower beer?
My go-to shower beer? Oh, I like them big. Are you talking about the subreddit or just the concept of drinking beer in a shower?
Drinking beer in a
Either way.
shower. We are rated R, not NC-17.
Honestly, right now, I would have to say we haven't actually shipped any to Michigan yet. We just packaged our first batch, and that's why this can is all messed up. But this is Front Loader IPA. It's a traditional Northwest style IPA, something you haven't seen in a decade or so in these parts, at least. And we put this together at the brewery just because we were feeling nostalgic. And it is honestly my favorite beer that we have on tap right now. The only other thing that I would have in the shower, I don't have in a can. So it's really not really able to bring in the shower with you. But we have on draft in our pub only Kavik Hazy that is just top notch. That's of our products. Of what I personally, not gluten-free, there's a lovely, my go-to IPA is from a brewery called Ecliptic. It was founded by the famous John Harris, and they're my go-to brewery when I'm not drinking, when I'm not getting high on my own supply. And their IPA is called Starburst, and it's lovely. I don't know how their team does it, but their beer is never more than 2 weeks old on any shelf. So for that reason alone, they're my go-to. But that's my go-to shower beer, I'd say.
All right, my go-to shower beer, and I've put extensive research into it. I would call it science, except I forgot to write it down. And according to Adam Savage, the difference between fucking around and science is you write it down. I posted about it a couple of times. I mean, does that count? But the Metal Meridian, it's got that perfect level of, juicy oranginess, a little bit of bitter, still kind of crisp, not too heavy, not too light. Great shower beer.
There you go.
I proved that this morning when I got home from work at 8 a.m.
All right. What about you, Nick? What's your final question?
All right. Since you guys
There you go.
advocating gluten beer and brewing gluten beer, favorite not gluten-free beer in your fridge right now?
Well,
Or if you don't have it in your fridge. Well, Brian can't have one. If you could have one.
Ooh.
If I could.
I was gonna
if
say,
I could drink.
What's a beer you would love to try?
What's a beer that you would love to try that you would like to see a gluten-free version of?
I would love to try Guinness.
Okay.
I mean, I've accidentally taken one sip of Bud Light, and I freaked out because it wasn't my cider. I was bowling and getting drunk with friends, and I grabbed the wrong bottle, and I was like, "That's not my cider."
No.
No.
And I was just looking for a glass to spit it out in, and I took one sip when I was 19 of Corona. I would like to see what Guinness tastes like, at least as that landmark, because people always ask me, other homebrewers are like, well, I want to make Guinness. What's a good recipe? And I'm like, I don't know. Or someone will say, oh, does that stout you just posted, does it taste like Guinness? And I'm like, I described how it tastes to me, but I've never tasted Guinness, so I can't tell you if it tastes like Guinness.
Can we get a nitro stout for gluten-free Brian over here, Tyler?
Oh, we have stout on nitro and in our pub.
They just have to fly me out to Oregon. That's all. I'm actually working on going out to Oregon sometime post summer, maybe, hopefully.
Well, you make sure with Tyler so that you have that stout on there, and Tyler will
Right.
give you at least the closest to Guinness you will
Closest.
get with a nitro stout. What about you, Tyler? What's in your fridge?
Well, I already mentioned the Ecliptic Starburst. Does On Tap in the Garage count?
Sure.
All right, On Tap in the Garage, I
Sometimes-
have an unreleased, unblended lambic from a Portland brewery that is no longer with us. That is the rarest beer in all the world, and it is dear to my heart. Love you guys, miss you guys, and on special occasions, I pour myself a pint.
All right.
Rest in house.
Right.
If you can figure it out, I've given you enough clues.
That is going to do it. Episode 260. We're right up against the time. I appreciate everybody listening. Thank you to everyone. Better on Draft on YouTube and Facebook Live, betterondraft.tv to find us. Groundbreaker now in Michigan. Ask your beer stores, your bar owners to carry it for you. You know what? There is one question. We got about 30 seconds, so it's going to be more probably towards Brian to answer because Brian's going to be the best. Brian, I found out that my friend has celiacs, but I really want to give a plethora of beer for them to try. Now, obviously, I'm going to get my fiver of Groundbreaker. Give me one more brand that you would suggest to someone maybe who never really had beer that really wants to enter into beer.
Does it have to be available in Michigan or just nationwide?
The points are made up and everything doesn't matter, however that goes.
Okay, so my pick, I would say Beerly Brewing and the Blackbird Stout.
All right.
It's wonderful.
Perfect. That's going to do it. Better on Draft 260. No matter what you think of your beer, we think it's Better on Draft. Have a good night.
Peace.